The Australian Financial Review.
It started with an explosive all-staff email. Sent to more than 900 current and former Slater Gordon employees last month, it was brutal in its criticism of the law firm, its key executives, and its private equity owners. And it made public the sensitive pay and performance details of its staff. On the surface, it appeared to be a handover note from the outgoing head of HR to her replacement. But nothing was as it seemed. And what followed was a financial review investigation that would hinge on metadata, jail time, and a distinctive tattoo.
There's clearly dysfunction in the firm. Their image in the market and clearly as a place to work has been completely trashed by this whole saga, and that's going to be very hard to come back from.
Welcome to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray. Today, professional services reporter Maxim Shanahan and Rear Window columnist Hannah Wooten on Slater and Gordon's workplace meltdown and the mysterious woman at the centre of it all. It's Thursday, March 27. Quotes in this episode are voiced by AFR staff. Hi, Max. Hi, Hannah. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Lisa.
Thanks for having us, Lisa.
Max, it's just over a month since this rogue email was sent. Set the scene for us. Why is everyone, and not just the legal industry, talking about Slater and Gordon?
Well, Slater and Gordon has had a very eventful past 12 months. So there's sort of three intersecting stories, and the email is probably the culmination of these. There's an underpayment scandal, a lawsuit by a senior executive, and then in the background there's this sort of union battle that went on last year. So the underpayment, the first we heard of it was in July last year when we got this statement from the firm that they discovered they'd underpaid staff by about $300,000 going back almost a decade. And there's some contestation about this, but in at least one version of events, the person who discovered the underpayment in the first place was a payroll manager by the name of Bridget Maddox. And that's an important name to remember, Lisa. Mm-hmm. So this Bridget Maddox character, she then reports the underpayment to her boss, Alicia Gleeson, who was the chief people officer of Slater and Gordon at the time. Now, we don't find all this out until November last year when Alicia Gleeson lodges a lawsuit in the Fair Work Commission saying that she was unfairly terminated for reporting a, quote, systemic underpayment. And she was terminated at the end of July, so less than 2 weeks after the underpayment was publicly announced. And then the third thing that's sort of going on in the background throughout 2024 is an industrial dispute with unionised legal assistants, junior lawyers and other staff at the firm. And that goes on a lot longer than it has in the past and causes quite a bit of tension within the firm. And that's eventually resolved in December. And then it all culminates in February when this quite shocking email is sent to more than 900 current and former staff at Slater and Gordon. It's a very strange email. It has a whole host of extraordinary allegations, and eventually it finds its way into our inboxes. And as soon as you start reading it, you realise that this is an act of corporate sabotage that is almost unprecedented.
So, Hannah, you were one of the journalists who also received the email. Talk us through what was in it. What were you thinking when you read it?
So when I got this, it was 10 or 11 a.m. on Friday, February 21. And I got a message from a colleague to stop whatever I was doing and check my email. When I read it, I just thought, holy crap. The allegations in it were so serious, so far-reaching, and we do sometimes get tips like this about firms, but to have that much information in one go is unheard of.
Yeah, essentially the email more or less framed as a handover email to the incoming chief people officer.
As promised when we met the week before last, I'm sending you the handover I wish I had before I arrived.
And it was kind of informal, almost like unprofessional tone, but it really described a truly dysfunctional workplace.
Morale is abysmal. Money is hemorrhaging.
And made very, very pointed criticisms of pretty much every member of the firm's executive, a range of its senior leaders.
Complacency and mediocrity thrive here. And with a revolving door of CPOs, it's no wonder.
And it had a whole range of personal remarks about people, their working style, who they got along with, who they didn't get along with.
individual health issues, information about staff members' politics and personal views.
Yeah.
It was also scathing of Allegro, the private equity outfit that owns Slater's now,
Allegro, true to private equity form, is gutting the place.
and its plans to cut staff.
Heads are rolling, and what remains is a skeletal crew barely keeping things together. The end game? A polished up shell to be sold off at the right price.
The other thing that was in this email was this spreadsheet of pay details of all staff.
I've attached salary and FY24 bonus data, which should assist with your planning for the team.
And immediately that's what we started verifying. This was just the easier part to verify, unlike some of the more salacious allegations.
Best of luck. You'll need it. Cheers.
So before we get to what happened next, let's take a step back. Tell us about the firm Slater and Gordon. What was the lead up to this email?
So they're actually a really interesting firm with a long history, sort of a Melbourne institution. They really made their name defending injured workers and getting in really early on the class action trend that now a lot of firms have picked up. It was Slater's and Morris Blackburn that really became Australia's big workers' comp firms. Both are Melbourne institutions, both have strong reputations, really emphasise social justice. The other thing, again with both, is there's strong links to the Labor Party. So if you look at Slater's, Julia Gillard came through the firm, for example. A lot of political staffers work there before going into politics or vice versa. Its founder, Bill Slater, was actually a Labor state politician.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing with Slater's as well is they're one of the firms where for sort of the top law graduates who want to do good or have gone into the field because they care about social justice and the like, can do that without some of the compromises that may come financially with pursuing criminal law.
So their modern history, they were listed in 2007 on the stock exchange, one of the first law firms to do so. It went well. They became a share market darling worth almost $3 billion. Then there was this acquisition of a UK business called Quindell, and it all sort of went downhill from there. The share price dropped rapidly. Staff members who had invested into the business lost a lot of money. And I think at its peak, the share price was around $8. By 2023, it was about 50 cents. And they were salvaged by this private equity firm, Allegro Funds, for about $150 million. It was about 2 or 3 weeks after the deal formally closed that the underpayment was first purportedly discovered.
Yeah. So when it listed, a really big issue with professional services and law firms is that they have this partnership structure. And this is something that's been flagged as a problem with the PwC scandal, because everyone sort of buys into ownership of the firm. You work really, really hard when you're younger to end up owning a stake of it. And if it's then bought by private equity, you're sort of like, well, I've worked all this time and now there's other investors who are going to share the spoils with me. So what we're seeing here is this tension between the short-term demands of private equity coming up against the inward-looking incentives of professional services firms and partnerships.
So, Max, what was the response to the email and the news reports that flowed from it?
So the email was sent quite early in the morning, just before 10 o'clock. At about 1 o'clock, staff got an initial sort of briefing from the firm's chief executive. In that briefing, the firm told staff that Mari Ruiz-Matthijssen, the outgoing chief people officer whose name was attached to the email and who was framed as having sent it, denied having anything to do with it. She denied that she sent it, and at that very early stage, they indicated that they believed her. And then they were told that there would be an online meeting at about 4 o'clock. In the meeting, the firm's CEO, Dina Tutungi, went through the claims. She said that
what this person has done is take a grain of truth from here or there and extrapolated it in a way that's really damaging.
a lot of it was incorrect. It was designed to damage the firm.
This is absolute rubbish. It's a shame because there's actually a lot of good stuff going on at Slater's and we're in an incredibly strong position.
It wasn't a cyber attack. Members of the executive said that it had been forwarded internally and externally something like 300 times, and Dina herself was one of those people. I think everyone was still in a state of shock at that time, but they were very quick to say that they believed Mari, that she didn't send it. So the mystery again kind of deepened. If it wasn't Mari, then who sent it?
Mm-hmm.
And as we found out over the preceding weeks, there are a lot of sort of checkable claims to that email which turn out to be true. The rest of it is sort of a lot of wildly defamatory opinions about people, but it's clearly someone who was very close to the firm, had a lot of involvement or insight into day-to-day decisions and sort of interpersonal relationships. They followed that up with a statement at about just after 4 o'clock that said, what is presented as internal information, it is in many ways a work of fiction. They referred the matter to police and then they called in cybersecurity experts to get to the bottom of it.
To me, the crux of where they made a mistake at the start and what staff really pushed back against was they said it wasn't true without actually saying what was not true. And the reality was a lot of it was. Everyone could look at it and say, you know, it might be a couple of months out of date, but that matches what my pay is. So it meant to the people who there were allegations made against, there was obviously frustration because Slaters didn't come out and say this aspect of it isn't true. And lawyers were then kind of offended on the flip side of that because Slaters has this workforce where their job is to professionally scrutinise evidence and try and see gaps in arguments and try and work out the truth of what happened and how to convince people of it. And they had their employers saying to them, don't apply any of that sort of like common sense, that analysis. Just take our word for it, even though we're not really giving you the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that was in the email, which we hadn't mentioned, is it actually had all of their latest performance ratings. So staff are ranked, essentially, and then your performance rating may impact your progression, your bonuses, etc. Pretty tough system in the first place to just be assigned a number that is your performance rating. Even tougher to then have everybody in your firm be able to see it. There had been some concerns around staff before this that people were getting unfairly low performance ratings because of this tension with private equity. They thought maybe they were trying to sort of save dollars and not needing to pay staff more. And to some people, this sort of really reinforced that frustration for them. So now there's whispers of potential claims against Slaters. Its staff specialise in workers' compensation and class actions. Like, of course, they're going to start thinking about that. Ironically, Slaters is actually the firm running some of the big privacy class actions currently against corporates. So law firms are kind of sniffing out for plaintiffs. Rival law firms are circling staff and saying, if you're annoyed, you could come work for us. So there is this kind of awareness that this is a highly frustrated workforce who doesn't feel like they've got the full story, and now they're weighing up their options.
Yeah. And then just when we think it can't get any weirder, this character who's been in the story right since the day that the underpayment was discovered, whose name I told you to remember, Lisa, Bridget Maddox, she pops back up again. And it turns out she's not quite who she says she is.
Max, we're talking about the rogue email that has shaken up law firm Slater and Gordon and reverberated around the legal industry. As you started to look into who was behind the email and the information it contained, one name kept coming up. Who is Bridget Maddox?
Bridget Maddox, we think, is in her early 40s. She's the former payroll manager at Slater and Gordon, the one who purportedly discovered the underpayment in the first place. She left in December last year. And in October last year, Bridget Maddox was suspended by Mari Rose Mathiasen for improperly allocating a gift voucher, which had been meant for employees' anniversaries. Instead of sending that to those employees, she sent it to herself, to her own personal email account. And that was only worth $200, but she's suspended over that. She leaves in December, she gets a decent payout and a non-disclosure agreement with the firm. And now, we're not suggesting that she sent or authored the email, and police and the firm are still investigating the source. But what we do know is that her first name matches the metadata attached to the spreadsheet that's attached to the all-staff email.
So Bridget was in that metadata, that first name Bridget.
Yep, just the first name Bridget, but it's quite a unique spelling.
BRIDGETT.
Yep. And so we thought it was curious that her name appeared in the metadata. There were innocent explanations as to why it might be there, but we thought it was worth taking a look. And so in our research, we come across another name, Bridget Jones. It's a common name, but the same unique first name spelling. And we started to see if we could match the two identities. And then through that process, we discovered through court records, some corporate filings, some former associates, some social media posts, and also documents supplied by Maddox herself that they were the same person. Bridget Maddox is Bridget Jones.
And why is that significant?
So it turns out that Bridget Jones is a convicted fraudster with a very long rap sheet of fraud and forgery. Now, before we go through her very extensive rap sheet, it's important to note that Maddox completely denies the allegations and claims that the real story is in fact corruption at Slater & Gordon and the covering up of this historical underpayment that keeps popping up in this story. So her criminal history goes all the way back to 2006 when she worked at Pizza Hut.
Yeah, so she was working at Pizza Hut and stole the credit card details from customers and then used that information for her own financial benefit. Then in 2007, she got a $400 unfair dismissal payout from a previous employer. Then she just added a sneaky zero to it and took $4,000 from the law firm's trust account. When we get to the mid-2010s, it looks like her offending escalated.
She received a suspended sentence in 2014 for misusing 4 corporate credit cards. She'd spend them primarily at fashion stores from sentencing remarks. And even though she has that suspended sentence, she goes and gets a job as a payroll assistant at a small flooring company called Premium Floors. And while she's there, she manages to, through various different means, transfer almost $250,000 from the firm to her own personal bank account.
So she's gone from taking a few $1,000s from people's credit card numbers to actually transferring tens of thousands of dollars from companies to her own accounts.
That's correct.
So this was uncovered in 2017 and she confessed and unsurprisingly was sacked. We understand she paid it back. So then the next month she popped up at a labour hire firm called Ultro and she started transferring money to herself again. In the end, she got 1-year sentences for both the Premium Floors and the Ultro Construction matters. The sentencing judge had some interesting comments there.
The judge described her as, quote, an extremely intelligent woman for whom scamming has become second nature. She considers her on both occasions to be a high risk of reoffending, and before sentencing her to a prison term, she counsels her to never again get a job that has anything to do with finances. So we got in contact with Bridget Maddox, and she was very articulate and she denied any link to Bridget Jones. She confirmed her birth date, which is the same as this Bridget Jones character, but once we started pressing her, she avoided answering other questions about her identity. She says her departure from Slater & Gordon was the result of the firm trying to protect its image and claims the underpayment, which keeps coming up, was deliberate. And then it got a little weirder again. She starts sending me documents to try and prove that she's not Bridget Jones. She sends a range of things. These include a clean police check, some first and business class tickets to South America in 2017. This was in the second half of 2017 when, if she was Bridget Jones, she would have been in prison. And she also sends a birth certificate with her name as Bridget Maddox and a divorce certificate, again specifying a wedding in 2017 when she would have been in prison. And while she was trying to throw us off the trail, one of the things she sent to us, again in the second half of 2017 when Bridget Jones was supposedly in jail, was a photo of her on Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro. And in that photo, you can see this huge back tattoo which covers her whole back. And if you sort of zoom in and look at it, you can see an image of the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. And the Cheshire Cat, as I found out in the last couple of weeks, is a character who sort of is able to reinvent itself at will and constantly reappears in different forms, in different identities.
So then how did you ultimately prove that Bridget Maddox is Bridget Jones?
Well, it all gets quite confusing. You start to doubt yourself a lot. We had the birth dates, we had a range of other evidence, but we started to look at the documents she sent us. They all appeared legitimate. They looked like real plane tickets, a real birth certificate, and there probably were elements of truth to them. But none of them really distanced Maddox from Jones, and in some way, they actually pointed you to a link. But the real proof and the thing that finally convinced us came by way of a distinctive tattoo. So there are photos of Bridget Maddox in which she has quite a distinctive shoulder tattoo, and that was a piece of identifying information we thought we could use. And we went through, we searched everywhere for references to Bridget Jones, and we came across a Twitter profile which hadn't been used in more than a decade. And it was attributed to a Bridget Jones with the same unique spelling, the 2 T's, and it had a photo of a person who looked like a much younger Bridget Maddox, and they also had the same quite distinct large shoulder tattoo.
And Max didn't just stop there. He then went back to people that knew Jones, showed them a photo of Maddox, and asked if they were the same person. They all said yes. So now we've proven Bridget Maddox and Jones are the same person, which then proves Slater and Gordon hired a convicted fraudster. But the fundamental question of who sent this email that launched the investigation remains.
Mm-hmm.
So after weeks of radio silence from the firm, this week we got a big update on their investigation. The firm said it suspected a former employee with access to internal pay data was responsible for what it called a premeditated and carefully planned attack. This was the first major update it had given since the email. The firm also confirmed that it had shared the results of this investigation with Victoria Police, and it says it's going to keep working with them.
So we have the update from the investigation, but Slater and Gordon are still dealing with the fallout from this saga. What happens next? Can Slater and Gordon come back from this?
So the firm's sticking to its view that it was a lone wolf attack, but there's obviously a bigger issue at play. We have a lawsuit from a former chief people officer who is going to continue to litigate this underpayment issue. That's going to hang around for a while. A lot of angry staff, naturally. So there's still a whole range of issues that Slater and Gordon is going to have to confront. As Dina Tutungi said on the day of the email, the sender had taken a grain of truth and extrapolated it. And in terms of grains of truth, there's clearly dysfunction in the firm. There's more than 900 angry current and former staff who've just been through an industrial relations battle, so relations there are going to have to be repaired. And most pressingly for management, their image in the market and clearly as a place to work has been completely trashed by this whole saga, and that's going to be very hard to come back from.
Look, I think for Slaters, it's what they do to put this to bed. For a start, to staff, they need to be able to conclusively say who sent the email and what happened. They also need to talk about how independent the investigation was, publish the findings, and talk about where they go from there. Beyond that, though, they need to talk about how they do due diligence on who they hire. They still hired this person into a payroll division where she has access to all their staff members, highly confidential information, financial information, and presumably access to, as in previous jobs, the firm's trust account and the likes of that. What was their due diligence behind that decision? As we heard from Max, yes, she changed her name, but a police check should bring that up. Did they not do one in this situation? Did they just look past it? If you're asking your staff to sort of trust your human resources department with all that information, I think there needs to be sort of questions answered about what you're doing to ensure that it is in fact safe. Then, in terms of Slater's as a broader firm, reputationally, it's built itself from the ground up on defending workers. If your boss doesn't treat you well, if your boss doesn't protect you, that's who you go to. There are now questions as to whether it's treating its staff properly and what the culture is within the firm. This is also a space that other law firms are really trying to get into. Whether it's class actions or whether it's workers' comp like Maurice Blackburn, this is a lucrative pie that a lot of people want a slice of. Whether Slater sort of keeps its market-leading position in that space, I think to an extent comes down to how they respond to this crisis, because it will affect their reputation with clients and also with staff, and whether the top law graduates want to go to them, whether they can shore up that next generation of talent and their future. So this is really a defining moment for the company and where it goes next.
Thanks, Max. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you for listening to The Fin. I'm Lisa Murray, with professional services reporter Maxim Shanahan and Rear Window columnist Hannah Wooten reporting today. The Fin is produced by Alex Gow. Lap Fan is head of podcast. Fiona Buffini is head of premium content. Our theme is by Alex Gow. If you like the show and want to hear more, follow us wherever you get your podcasts and consider rating and reviewing us, as it helps others find us. And just a heads up, once the federal election campaign kicks off, The Fin will be releasing a special weekly podcast. Every Tuesday, I'll be joined by political editor Phil Curry and our other Canberra experts to break down the big issues. If you want to get ahead of the game, send us your questions for the political panel. Email thefin@afr.com. For more stories about markets, business and power, subscribe to the Financial Review at afr.com/subscribe. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.